Lions, often regarded as the kings of the animal kingdom, possess their own unique set of qualities that make them formidable and dangerous in their own right. Their powerful builds, exceptional teamwork within prides, and lightning-fast sprints contribute to their reputation as apex predators. They are feared by millions of people around the world and wouldn't hesitate to attack and eat us alive. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. These are the most terrifying lion attacks on humans covered on the channel so far. Welcome to Final Affliction. Pilanesberg National Park is a stronghold for both black and white rhinos in South Africa. It is situated in the Bojanala region, relatively near Johannesburg. Comprising an area of 550 square kilometers, it is the fourth largest park in South Africa and is home to a huge and diverse array of wildlife. In South Africa, poaching rhinos for their horns is sadly still a huge problem. Parks and reserves do their best to prevent poaching by setting up anti-poaching patrols, but sometimes it feels like a losing battle. In the last couple of years, Pilanesberg has taken the drastic decision to remove their rhinos' horns to stop the senseless massacre of these beloved animals. But still, the patrols continued as to protect the wildlife under threat. One of the rangers involved in the anti-poaching patrol was Kobus Marais. He was a veteran in the park, having served the rhinos for more than 12 years. He was experienced and knowledgeable. He was part of the canine unit which used dogs to sniff out trails left by poachers or particular animals if they needed to track either of them. His dog, Hailey, was a Belgian Malinois. She was as faithful to him as he was to her, and training her regularly was part of Kobus's routine. His wife, Charlotte, was a representative of Copenhagen Zoo living in South Africa with Kobus. The Danish zoo sponsored and paid for the training and use of dogs to support the rangers on their patrols. Kobus's and Charlotte's last dog, Dexter, was also part of the program but died unexpectedly 5 years before. Hailey was stepping into some very big paws. Kobus was seen as one of the senior rangers and often trained new recruits to be the best they could be. He knew that education was a big part of rhino conservation and would take Hailey with him to schools and tell them about the work they did together and the importance of preserving South Africa's wildlife. On February 6, 2021, Kobus and Hailey joined two rangers on the routine anti-poaching patrol. They drove along the perimeter fence, searching for any signs of forced entry or animals in distress. They bounced up and down in their seats as the vehicle rocked and lurched over the heavily rutted track. It was a Saturday morning before the rising sun burned intensely in the African sky. Nature was just waking up for the day, but for some, they had never slept. A predator lay concealed in the bushes. It could hear the vehicle approaching and remained still and silent. It was desperate. Thin and malnourished, this animal was very dangerous as it would take its chances at any easy meal. Kobus and the team paused the vehicle and he and Hailey climbed out. Kobus was planning on setting a trail for his faithful companion, a regular training exercise for her. It was a Saturday, meant to be one of his days off, but he was devoted to his job and to the conservation of the rhinos in the reserve. The other two rangers continued along the fence line in the Land Rover. They rolled forwards, leaving Kobus behind. Although they hadn't gone far, they had made a terrible mistake. Unbeknown to them, there was an old male lion lurking in the bushes directly where they had left Kobus. Pushed out of the pride by the younger, stronger males, the male lion was now on his own. His hunting capacity as a lone ranger was limited. His speed wasn't what it once was, and he lacked the protection from the rest of the pride. He watched Kobus and Hailey with glassy golden eyes, his battle-scarred snout twitching with their scent. He lay perfectly still amongst the undergrowth, hidden by the tall grass and scruffy brush. He was thin and hungry. The sound of the vehicle's engine petered out some way along to track. Kobus walked with his dog by his side, the sounds from the African bush filling his ears. Crickets chirped in the grass, Hoopoes called from the branches, and a gentle breeze rattled through the bushes. He bent down to examine a disturbed patch of grass, and that's when the lion took its chance. It rushed forwards. Neither Kobus nor Haile saw it coming. Kobus didn't have time to reach for his firearm. He and his dog were caught completely off guard. There was just a flash of brown, and Kobus felt the hit. The enormous paws of the male lion wrapped around his shoulders. Its jaws latched onto his head, and Kobus was knocked to the ground. He let out a yell and screamed for the lion to get off him. He could hardly see anything amongst the tussle. Flashes of beige and brown, glimpses of sharp white teeth, and a face full of fur. The ground beneath him was soft from recent rains. The spiky grass was lush and green. Kobus could feel the crushing sensation of the jaws. He could feel the ripping and tearing from the lion's claws across his torso. He grimaced as he tried desperately to push the lion off him, but its heavy body pinned him down. Momentarily, it released Kobus's head and bit him again and again. During the intense attack, Haile fled in a panic and cowered in the nearby bushes. Kobus's cries were heard by his fellow rangers, and they immediately swung the vehicle around and raced back to where they had left him. The Land Rover jumped and bounded along over the potholes. Acacia thorns scraped the paintwork, and the engine revved as they sped back to Kobus. They had only been a couple of 100 yards away. They made it to the spot where they had left their colleague, and that's when they saw their fellow ranger underneath the lion. They didn't hesitate. Immediately, they raised their rifles and fired several shots into the lion. It collapsed in a heap next to Kobus. They ran to his side, but it was too late. He had breathed his last breath right then and there. The wounds from the mauling were too extensive and devastating. The attack had severed blood vessels, and he had lost too much blood. He lay still, and it was clear that he could not be revived. In a state of shock, the Rangers called in backup. Officers and Rangers arrived on the scene, and the lion was taken away to Andersdeport Veterinary Institute in Chouanay for a necropsy to determine exactly why it had attacked Kobus. There were no signs of disease, but the lion was old and thought to be starving. Its attack on Kobus was a last-ditch attempt at survival. His dog Haile was found nearby underneath a tree, unharmed but clearly shaken from the attack. She was taken back to base. The park lost one of their own that day, two of their own if you include the lion. Kobus was a deeply compassionate man. He worked tirelessly to ensure the safety of the animals. He was a true warrior in the fight against poaching and the illegal trade in rhino horn. That year, in 2021, 451 rhinos were poached in South Africa. This had increased by 13% from the year before. Anti-poaching patrols made 189 arrests in 2021, of which only 61 were successfully convicted. The penalty for poaching or smuggling rhino horn can be as much as 35 years in prison. It is obvious that the work rangers and anti-poaching units do is vital for the species' survival. The incident was a tragic case of 46-year-old Kobus being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The fence he and his fellow rangers were searching along was supposed to keep lions out of that section. Even though that part of the park was known as the Big Five area, lions were cordoned off from the area Kobus was walking in. Somehow, it had made it through the fence in a desperate attempt to find food, leading to Kobus Marais' terrifying final affliction. Islam Shaheed worked in the entertainment industry. He was a lion tamer, enthralling audiences in Egypt for years. Some would say his work was cruel, whilst others watched in awe as he commanded some of the most powerful predators on the planet. Lion Village was located an hour and a half from Cairo. Visitors could pay entry for the chance to see lions, tigers, camels, and snakes. The conditions the animals were kept in were poor, with very little space to move around. Many were emaciated, clearly undernourished, and in need of veterinary treatment. Still, the popularity of the attraction kept it going and continued to draw in crowds. Islam had worked as a lion tamer for 13 years. He knew the shows inside and out and was confident in the presence of the big cats. The circus in Alexandria was popular with locals. The arena was filled with men, women, and children, all excited to see the performance and the wild animals up close. A large group of school pupils filled the seating area, set safely behind bars. But in December 2016, the audience, and indeed Islam, were in for a big shock. The gathering crowd waited patiently for the show to start, whilst dance music played in the background. The suspense building for the entrance of the lions. There were 3 of them, each weighing in excess of 200 kilograms, 440 pounds. The newest member of the pride had recently been brought over from South Africa. Sadly, he was destined for a life in captivity, made to perform for people and bow down to the commands thrown at him. But as some circus performers claim, no wild animal can truly be tamed. The new lion was impressive, with a large, shaggy mane and powerful muscular body. On his hind legs, he was easily taller than any of the trainers, but he was temperamental. He had attacked a trainer before, and yet they continued to use him in the show. Nothing had been done about him, and the trainers assumed that with time he would learn the routines and become more adaptable. But by December 2016, he still hadn't been trained to the same extent as the other lions, and therefore posed a real threat inside the arena. Although he was a captive lion, his natural instincts were still raw, deeply embedded in him. Mohammed Mustafa, the park spokesperson, suggested that it was mating season, and the lion therefore had a heightened sense of aggression on that fateful Saturday. Testosterone was coursing through his body, and being coerced by humans to perform tricks in front of a crowd was particularly dangerous at that time of year. Others believe that this explanation was just a cover-up for what was about to happen. As one lion climbed a ladder, Islam commanded it to open its mouth so that he could touch its tongue with a stick. With its mouth opened wide, his long, sharp canines were fully on display for those in the audience to see. But the third lion, and the newest member of the team, stood still, eyeing Islam. He stood just a few yards away from the trainer, never taking his eyes off of the man. They were fixed in a stare. 2 other trainers were in the arena with Islam. They were all wielding wooden sticks which they used to hit the lions in order to get them to perform. That was their only weapon of defense. If something went wrong, there was no contingency plan or tranquilizer to subdue an aggressive lion. Islam waved his stick at one of the lions, beckoning him to take a step forwards. But something triggered an attack response in the newest lion as he stood still, waiting for his next command. His eyes were wide, his tail twitched slightly, and he took a step towards Islam. Whether due to mistreatment, natural aggression, hunger, or being startled by something, the lion suddenly launched himself at Islam. In that split second, Islam tried to jump out of the way, but the lion was too quick. It secured the trainer with its powerful front legs, clasping him with his paws. Its sharp claws dug into Islam's clothing and punctured his skin. Instinctively, the lion went for Islam's throat, thrusting its face forwards. It grabbed Islam's head and neck with its wide jaws, readjusting its grip on him again and again, mauling him in front of a terrified audience. As it stood on its hind legs, it bit into flesh and tore through skin, and blood poured from Islam's open wounds. The lion was much taller than Islam and far more powerful. The trainer couldn't stand up to its might. In an instant, he was floored by the lion, and it pinned him to the concrete ground. Below him, he could feel the coolness of the concrete, and above him, the warmth of the lion's body. It made a deep growl as it shook its head from side to side, its warm, moist breath on Islam's battered and bruised skin. Islam tried to push the lion off him, but it was too heavy. He couldn't get a secure hold on the lion, and he couldn't wriggle out from underneath it. He grappled with the ferocious beast, punching and scratching at the lion's face, trying to find a weak spot to make the lion release its grip. Moments later, the loud disco music cut out, and all that could be heard were the terrified screams of the audience. Some picked up their mobile phones and began filming the incident as it unfolded right before their eyes. Children watched in horror when they realized what was happening, and parents ushered them out of their seats and ran outside. It was pandemonium as everyone cleared out, leaving behind just the 3 men and 3 lions to battle it out. The other trainers immediately leapt into action, trying to scare the lion off of their colleague. They jabbed at it with their sticks, driving them into the lion's ribs and thrashing it on its back. But the lion did not let up. It continued to maul Islam. It crushed his face in its jaws. The crunch of bone and tearing of flesh were all that the trainer could hear, amongst his own cries for help. The lion bit into his shoulder, shaking his head and ripping through the skin. Then he turned his attention to Islam's throat. One single bite of the neck, and Islam's windpipe would be crushed. He would be suffocated in an instant. With the full weight of the lion on top of him, he had no way of getting out from underneath it. He lay on the cold, hard floor, helpless, sandwiched by the great beast. But his colleagues didn't let up. They continued to bring their sticks, raining down on the animal until eventually he released his grip on the man and jumped off him. The lion walked away, its jowls dripping red with Islam's blood. An ambulance was called and staff tried to stem the bleeding from the gaping hole in Islam's neck. Islam lay motionless on the floor. He didn't utter a word. His eyes were closed. His breathing was shallow and his heartbeat faint. He was fading fast. Emergency services arrived and Islam was rushed to Adalushan Salam Hospital in Smaua area, east of Alexandria. It was a race against time to save him. He suffered from a fractured skull, deep cuts to his face and neck, broken bones in his chest, and abdominal bleeding. Doctors fought to save him, but sadly, he succumbed to his injuries a couple of days later. Following Islam's death, the lion village was shut down until a thorough investigation was carried out. Although the park spokesperson claimed that the lion was in mating season and therefore behaved erratically, others suggested that the lion was either hungry due to malnutrition or was startled by the loud music. Following the fatal incident, photos emerged of Islam working as a lion tamer. He was able to get within inches of the lions, something that impressed the crowds. He shared a stick with one large male lion, with the whiskers of the lion touching Islam's chin. He was clearly fearless in the presence of the big cats, but maybe it was his lack of fear that contributed to his terrifying final affliction. For visitors to Wangi Park in northwestern Zimbabwe, a walking safari is often considered an experience of a lifetime. But for professional Zimbabwean guide 40-year-old Quinn Swales, it was his job, and he loved every second of it. He was originally from Trelawney in northern Zimbabwe and had worked as a pilot before turning his hand to wildlife guiding. All guides in Zimbabwean parks are trained to a very high standard, and Quinn was no exception. He knew Wangi Park like the back of his hand. It was his office, and what an office it was. Wangi Park is Zimbabwe's largest park, spanning 14,650 square kilometers. It is home to 4 of the Big 5, elephant, lion, leopard, and buffalo, and is home to Africa's largest population of wild dogs. It offers exceptional game viewing and photograph opportunities for paying guests. It is one of the best places to experience the wilds of Africa in all its glory. But the park had become famous for all the wrong reasons only the month before. Cecil the lion made headlines when he was illegally hunted by American dentist Walter Palmer. Cecil was a magnificent 13-year-old male who was considered the top attraction at Wangi. The incident sparked outrage across the globe as details emerged of the hunt in which Walter shot and injured Cecil with a bow and arrow and then tracked the maimed lion for more than 40 hours before shooting him with his rifle. This act of cruelty was not unfelt by the rangers and guides who worked tirelessly to protect the animals in their park, whilst also providing paying guests with the best experiences to observe the wildlife safely. Quinn was in his job to enjoy the wildlife and allow his guests the same experience, not to kill it. At dawn, on Monday the 24th of August, 2014, Quinn took a group of guests staying at Camp Wangi out for a photographic walking safari. As the milky haze of the dawn light was just appearing on the horizon, the group eagerly walked through the bush. There was a chill in the air as night gave way to day, but it wasn't long before Quinn spotted some tracks in the soft, sandy soil. Along the edge of the open savanna were some telltale signs that Quinn's guests were in for a treat and likely an exceptional photographic opportunity. There were large paw prints, and Quinn identified them as lion footprints. He knew exactly which pride they belonged to as well. He had grown to know the lions over the years and knew them all individually, something the guests were always impressed with. Slowly, the group made their way along the edge of the brown grass, following the footprints until Quinn stopped. The guests all stood still in a line behind the guide. Pressing his forefinger to his lips, Quinn turned to the group and then pointed out the pride of lions. They were lying in the open at some distance away. The 6 clients Quinn was guiding marveled at the spectacle. They looked so peaceful and calm as they lay there, seemingly without a care in the world. They were perfectly illuminated by the early morning light, but something was about to change. The lions had spotted Quinn and his group, but they didn't seem to be too bothered by their presence. They were no threat to them at that distance. The group stood completely still in silence, some of them snapping away with their cameras. Then the male lion called Naksaha stood up. Clearly, he wasn't happy about them being there. He began to walk purposefully towards the group, and the guests began to feel their adrenaline pumping. They could see the male lion's huge, shaggy mane and the intent in his shiny bronze eyes. He wasn't running towards them, but his strides were confident and decisive. There was nowhere for the group to go. They were totally exposed on the African savanna, with no vehicle or camp to retreat to. And still, the lion kept coming. Although the clients' hearts thundered in their chests and they felt the urge to run away, Quinn had experienced this situation many times before. He didn't feel fear. He was an experienced and expert guide and knew exactly what to do. His priority was the safety of his guests. He spoke calmly and directly to them, briefing them on what to do. They listened intently, their eyes wide. He told them to get behind him and stand perfectly still. When the lion continued to walk towards them, it breached the safety distance Quinn felt comfortable with. When he had been in this situation before, the lions had usually stopped after a short distance and returned to the pride. But this time the threshold had been breached, and Quinn and the rest of the group began shouting loudly to deter the lion. This had the desired effect. The male lion stopped walking and stood still. He watched them, his eyes fixed on the group, his tail twitching. He was an impressive sight, but one which filled the group with fear, as they didn't know what he was going to do next. As he stood there, Quinn used the opportunity to set off a bear banger, which is a very loud fire bang. As the loud crack rang out, silencing the birds on the savanna, the lion jumped and immediately began to walk off obliquely from the group. It looked like he would return to the pride, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief. They never took their eyes off the lion, but it seemed that they were out of danger, and that this would be one of those stories they would laugh about later around the campfire. But this story was about to take a sinister turn. Suddenly, the lion turned and sprinted towards Quinn and his 6 guests. It took them all by surprise. Just when they thought the danger had gone, it was sprung on them once more. This was no mock charge, and Quinn didn't have any time to fire his rifle. He stood staring down the face of the lion as it ran straight at him. Almost 60% of a lion's weight is made up of muscle, more than any other mammal in the animal kingdom, with males weighing up to 225 kilograms, 496 pounds. They are power, rapid, and formidable. The lion covered the ground in seconds, its beige-brown body glistening in the morning sun, its huge mane bouncing on its shoulders as it charged forwards. Quinn didn't betray his guests and flee. He stood his ground, unable to fire a single shot. He stood in harm's way, taking the full brunt of the attack to protect his guests. At the last second, the lion leapt onto him, and he was thrown to the ground. He smacked his head on the dry soil and tried to fend off the enormous predator, but it pushed him down and immediately pressed its head forward. The sandy dust was kicked up amidst the commotion, and the lion bit down on Quinn's neck and shoulder. He was powerless to stop it. The full weight of the lion and the ferocity of its bite were overpowering, and Quinn could only grapple with it, trying to protect his face and neck. Blood poured from his open wounds, and the rest of the group could only shout at the lion to try and get it to stop. Seconds later, the lion jumped off Quinn and retreated to the rest of the pride. But in that brief yet powerful attack, the damage had been done. When the lion was far enough away, the others rushed to Quinn's side. They tried to perform emergency first aid, but the lion's long canines had severed Quinn's arteries, and he had bled out within seconds. He lay, limp and lifeless, on the ground, just yards from the animals he had spent so many years admiring and vowing to protect. Hurriedly, the group grabbed Quinn's handheld radio and radioed through to the camp. Rangers came to the rescue, and Quinn was carried away. The morning had so quickly turned into an unimaginable tragedy. The guests had been physically unharmed during the attack. They were lucky that the lion hadn't turned on them as well. It was a devastating loss of life. David Carson, the general manager of Camp Wangi, who was also a professional guide for more than 2 decades, praised Quinn's heroic actions. He said of Quinn, "He paid the ultimate price in pursuit of a job he loved in an area he knew so well." Quinn was an exceptional guide, and his passion and respect for the wildlife he worked amongst came across through his guiding. The last picture he posted on his Facebook page was of Cecil the lion, who was mercilessly hunted by Walter Palmer. India's Gir National Park is the only place in the world where Asiatic lions live in the wild. Their comeback from just 50 individuals has been hailed a conservation success story, but with numbers climbing to more than 500, their population and habitat needs to be closely monitored to keep the population alive, whilst also keeping locals safe. This is something that appears to be failing at the moment. Management of the lions is controversial. Wildlife officers regularly leave out bait to entice the lions to tourist hotspots. Paying visitors pay their wages and for the conservation of the park. Keeping tourists happy and coming back for more is paramount to the park's survival. But experts warn that baiting the lions will only lead to trouble, deadly trouble. Over time, the lions may lose their ability to hunt, relying solely on the free handouts provided by the rangers. Not only will they start associating these meals with humans, but they may turn to easier prey, such as livestock or people. A little more than 10 miles from one of the protected forests where the lions roam lies the village of Dahanfulia. 17-year-old Bhavna Baria and her cousin were working as farm laborers. Bhavna lived with her parents in Metan village in eastern Gujarat, but she was visiting her family in Dahanfulia. She had accepted an offer to work with her mother's brother on his farm. It was hard work, but it brought in money for the family. After a long day's work, she and her cousin Rekha settled down for the night in the family's cottage. They pulled their bed covers up to their chins and rested their heads on their pillows. Just before drifting off to sleep, however, Bhavna felt the urge to use the bathroom. It was 9:30 p.m. Outside, it was dark except for the moon. Everything was bathed in its silvery glow. Bhavna asked Rekha to come with her. The toilet was a short walk from where they were sleeping. It was a small shack outside, but Bhavna didn't want to go alone. The two of them opened the cottage door and stepped out into the stillness of the night. They breathed in the fresh air. The buzzing of insects filled the darkness, but there were predators on the hunt that night. The village lay on the banks of Ozat River. It was a place that was frequented by lions that weren't confined to the borders of the national park. The rushing of the water could be heard in the distance, a sound that masked any approaching predators. The girls were unaware that 2 pairs of eyes were trained on them. The reflective glare from a flashlight would have been a giveaway to the imminent danger they were in, but neither of them possessed a flashlight. Instead, they were following the narrow path by the moonlight. It wound through the field away from the safety of the house. Dark shadows surrounded them. The expanse of the fields they had been working in disappeared into the gloom. The two predators approached. Stealthily, they stalked across the open field, whilst the two girls hurried towards the shack. But before they could reach it, just yards from its door, the two cousins saw a pair of male lions sprinting towards them. Even in the murkiness, they could see their powerful forelimbs striding across the open, their huge dark manes waving with the motion of their gallop. Their eyes were fixed in a stare. There was nowhere to escape to. They couldn't make it back to the house or into the hut in time. There were no trees to climb. The seconds seemed to stand still. Although the lions were lightning fast, the two girls could see every detail in those terrifying moments. Before they launched themselves onto the girls, Rekha jumped into a water tank. She splashed into the shoulder-high water and crouched down, hardly daring to breathe. She closed her eyes and listened in terror as she heard the fate of her cousin. Bhavna wasn't so lucky. The lions had emerged out of nowhere. She didn't have time to react. Before she could escape, one of the lions grabbed her in its jaws. It instinctively went for the throat, biting down with a force of 650 psi, 3 times greater than a human's, and with canines 10 centimeters, 4 inches long. She didn't stand a chance. The bite crushed her windpipe and severed her artery. She had let out a scream moments before that pierced the dark, but now the night returned to its stillness. Bhavna no longer made a sound. She lay on the ground surrounded by the two lions as they inspected their kill. Rekha was frozen in terror. From inside the water tank, she heard the deep growling of the lions as they bit into her young cousin, tearing at her lifeless body. She then heard a scraping along the ground as they tugged at Bhavna, dragging her away into the night. They secured their prey, and now they would feast in the forest. When Rekha couldn't hear any more commotion, she tentatively peeked out over the top of the water tank. Her heart was pounding, like the beating of a drum in her ears. She listened, watching and waiting. Then, when she thought the lions had left, she clambered out of the water tank and jumped down onto the ground. She then rushed to the cottage, screaming for her parents to help. She didn't know if her cousin was dead or alive. She assumed the worst, but held onto a glimmer of hope that she could be saved if they acted quickly. She couldn't bear the thought of Bhavna being out there on her own, gravely injured. Officers of the Gir Somnath Social Forestry Division were alerted to the incident and raced to the scene. A search for Bhavna and the two lions was mounted. They followed the drag marks left by the lions and their prey, and tragically found the two big cats tucking into the body of Bhavna quite a distance away. They had dragged her off to a nearby farm. It was clear that she was no longer alive, and the officers shouted and clapped their hands loudly to try and frighten the lions away. They were two sub-adult males, likely brothers, who worked together to take down their prey. They couldn't be chased away for half an hour, by which time they had consumed the lower half of Bhavna's body. It was a gruesome sight, and one which will likely haunt all those who witnessed it. The Deputy Conservator of Forests, who works in Gir National Park, said that attacks on humans by Asiatic lions were incredibly rare. Many locals live on the outskirts of the protected forests, and although livestock are occasionally taken by lions, they rarely target people. The behavior had been uncharacteristic, and officials were working on capturing the two lions and returning them to the protected area. It is obvious that the lions make money for locals. Tourists come from far and wide to see these rare subspecies, but sometimes people take things too far. Just days before this tragic attack, locals used the lions in a sickening, viral video to make money. They tethered a cow to a tree and waited silently for a lion to approach. With their phones, they filmed the lion closing in on the cow. They streamed it live to paying customers in a shocking pay-per-view video. People from all around the world tuned in to watch as the lion dived on top of the cow and demolished her. There was no way for the cow to fight back or flee. She was tied to her position, all for the entertainment of a paying crowd. Using the lions like this is only going to lead to casualties. These illegal videos are threatening the conservation efforts of Gir National Park and putting locals and livestock at unnecessary risk. The incident was a tragedy. To lose someone so young was a shock for the entire family and the small village community. Bhavna's parents, who had remained at their home village, were informed of the terrible news, and those who knew their young daughter mourned her loss. Living in such close proximity to dangerous wildlife doesn't come without its risks. Farmland and villages are often bordering the lion's natural habitat, as both people and lions compete for space. But as the Asiatic lion population continues to swell, perhaps more needs to be done to ensure both their safety and those who share their habitat, ensuring that no one else like Bhavna Baria meets their terrifying final affliction. In 2015, Safari Lodge owner and conservationist West Mathewson made a decision that would change his life forever. He rescued 2 one-week-old lion cubs from a nearby farm that bred lions until they were big enough and old enough to be released into the bush to be hunted by trophy hunters. West thought the sport was cruel and couldn't stand the thought of these 2 female cubs being reared for slaughter. They were rare white lionesses, and West saw a business opportunity in the making. He bought the pair of them and took them back to his Lion Tree Top Lodge in Hedensprut, just outside the infamous Kruger National Park in the Limpopo province of South Africa. He was as devoted to them as he had been to his own children, and named them Demi and Tanner. Day and night, he bottle-fed them until they were weaned onto a diet consisting mostly of meat. He built in a daily routine which included playing with the cubs and taking them on walks 2 or 3 times a day. He was their father figure, and they became like family to him. Soon, he was introducing his guests to the cute lionesses, and they were certainly a huge visitor attraction. On his website, West posted many photos of the guests playing with the young lions and enjoying the close-up experience, even with children walking side by side with them. But they were growing up. As the months ticked by, they grew bigger and required more exercise and space to roam. They were becoming powerful, and West could see that their play fighting was beginning to resemble that of adult lions. But West remained as devoted to them as he had ever been. By 3 years old, the lionesses were considered fully grown. West developed the nickname Uncle West, as he was seen as a caring, fatherly figure to the 2 white lionesses. He wrapped his arms around their enormous heads, giving them tight hugs, and they would sometimes include him in their play fighting, which often became too rough for West to join in. He had to be careful. In his late 60s, West certainly wasn't getting any younger, and the lionesses were only getting stronger and bolder. Whilst Demi and Tanner hadn't shown any aggression towards West, his family, or any of his visitors, there were warning signs that they still had strong wild instincts. It was only natural for them to display their natural behavior. Although they had been hand-reared by West and had only ever known their life on his property, they still had the innate ability to hunt. In 2017, when the pair were 2 years old, they escaped from West's property. On the other side of the fence, they had spotted Kepekulu Justice and a colleague who were out on the veld collecting wood. When one of the lionesses ran towards Justice, she leapt onto him and pinned him to the ground, whilst the other female stood watching. The man yelled for help, and his friend came to his rescue, picking up stones and pelting them at the lion. She ran off, and Justice's friend helped him to his feet and carried him to a phone box to call for an ambulance. He was bloodied all over and suffered from lacerations to his legs, torso, stomach, and chest. The 2 men made it to the hospital, but Justice, who was a diabetic, died a few days later. It was a tragic incident, and doctors couldn't say whether his death was definitely due to the attack or his underlying health condition. In response to the awful incident, West said that he was sure that the lioness just wanted to play, and if she had wanted to kill him, then he would have been dead in 5 seconds. Whether that statement was true or not, it still shows the raw power that both Demi and Tanner possessed. They were, at the end of the day, wild animals, despite being tamed. West was probably right. A single bite to the man's neck would have sealed his fate in a matter of seconds, but it served as a stark warning to the dangers of keeping such animals in your care. West had a great responsibility to the general public, but there was no way of completely taming a lion. They were too powerful to be held back, and West wanted them to have the freedom to roam on his land. But fast forward to August 2020, when the two lionesses were 5 years old and West was 69, and history was about to repeat itself. West called for the lions as he took his daily stroll through his land, and Demi and Tanner came trotting over. West's wife, Gil, followed behind him in their car. The sun was shining and there was a gentle breeze rattling through the thick, scruffy brush. The sounds of the African bush were alive as the three of them walked along in silence, as they did every day. It was an incredible sight for Gil, watching her husband walking through the African bush, flanked by two enormous white lionesses. It was a dream come true for West. He was always a keen conservationist, and owning a property in the greater Kruger area, where he was able to interact with the animals, was everything he had ever wished for. But something was about to go horribly wrong. During the walk, the two lionesses began play fighting. It was something they regularly did. They were constantly testing each other's strength and fighting skills. It was natural behavior, but they were getting more aggressive with one another. West stood still whilst the two females grappled with one another. He could hear their guttural growling as they pinned each other to the ground and gnawed on each other's fur. He could tell they weren't holding back as much as they used to do. This was definitely a play fight West didn't want to get involved with. But it turned out the 69-year-old didn't have a choice. Like two overly excited children going a step too far, Demi and Tanner were getting more and more rowdy. Suddenly, one of the females leapt off the other one and launched itself at West. He was immediately flattened by her. The air was knocked from his lungs as he was thrown to the floor. He hadn't had time to protect himself, as the action was totally unexpected. Clouds of dust kicked up as the lioness began mauling West. He shouted at her to stop, but she continued biting him. Gil could see her husband was in trouble. She had seen him wrestle with the lions many times before, but this was different. This was much more frenzied and powerful. She honked the car horn and shouted out of the window. She rammed the car forwards to scare the lions away. Mercifully, the lioness snapped out of the zone she was in and jumped up and off West. Gil ran to his side. He was bleeding profusely, and she tried to stem the bleeding from his neck. As the African soil turned red all around West, Gil called the emergency services. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but it was too late. West had died in Gil's arms. The attack had happened so quickly that there wasn't anything Gil could have done. One powerful bite to West's neck, and an artery was severed. There was no coming back from that, and in an instant, Uncle West was gone. The two lionesses he had nursed from 1 week old had turned on him, and his legacy came to a tragic end. Whilst the family tried to come to terms with the devastating loss of West, who was a father to 4 sons and grandfather to 6 grandchildren, they were determined that the animals would not be harmed. It was not what West would have wanted, and his daughter-in-law, Terry Mathewson, was certain that the lionesses were only engaging in rough play. They didn't know their own strength, and one of them had inadvertently killed their owner and carer. It was unlikely to have been a deliberate attack, but it had ended in disaster. Demi and Tanner were darted and were removed from the property. Having mourned the loss of West, it was sad for the family to see the lions go. They had been such a big part of West's life over the past 5 years that their loss was like losing him all over again. They were taken to an endangered species center, and the family stated that they would be released into the best environment available to them. While saying goodbye to a loved one is never easy, the family found comfort and peace and knowing that West died doing what he loved, living his dream, being in nature and with his lions that were so close to his heart. But as long as people continue to be around dangerous apex predators like these two lions, West Mathewson won't be the last one to meet their terrifying final affliction. Alexandra Black had graduated from Indiana University Bloomington and was pursuing a career in zoology. She had studied the integrative study of animal behavior and was determined to land a job working with animals. She had already worked as an intern at 3 different wildlife sanctuaries and reserves in the U.S. This was a step towards making a full-time living doing something that she loved. In December 2018, she began her 4th internship, this time at the Conservators Center in Burlington, North Carolina. Her previous internships included working at an Indiana Wolf Research Center and Wildcat Creek Wildlife Center. The center, founded in 1999, is home to around 20 big cats, including lions, tigers, and leopards. They drew in thousands of visitors to the center each year. Alexandra was being shown the ropes in the first few days of the job. She work-shadowed the staff there, learning the routine and understanding the needs of the various different animals they cared for. In most zoos and wildlife sanctuaries, only fully trained staff have access to the animal enclosures. Some have a complicated locking mechanism to ensure the safety of staff, such as keys that can't be removed from a lock unless it is locked properly, or hydraulic action gates. Some zoos require a minimum of 6 months' work experience at the vicinity until staff are deemed competent enough to hold the keys for a specific enclosure. The Conservators Center also had stringent measures in place to ensure the safety of the staff, general public, and the animals themselves. But on Alexandra's 10th day working at the center, something went badly wrong. The measures they had in place failed, causing catastrophic results. Many of the 15 lions they kept at the facility were rescued from appalling conditions. They had been kept in tiny cages, treated badly, and malnourished. Mathewson was one of the lions who had been rescued from these conditions from Ohio in 2004. Haunted by his past, he was nervous by nature, but enthusiastically received attention from the keepers he had grown to trust. On December 30th, 2018, Alexandra's 10th day at the facility, she joined the husbandry team to carry out routine cleaning in the lion enclosure. She was under the supervision of a professionally trained animal keeper. Each section of the enclosure was secured from the next. Trained personnel opened and closed the gates between the sections, but on this particular occasion, a large play ball rolled into the gateway. As the gate swung to a close, it was blocked from fastening shut by the ball. A freak accident, a 1 in a million accident that was to prove fatal. Mathewson nudged the gate with his snout. It swung open. He walked through, his huge paws stepping onto the cold, hard concrete. He was now just feet away from the staff, who were sweeping up the inner section. Unbeknown to Alexandra and the other staff, there was now nothing between the huge male lion and them. No wire or fencing, no gates or locks. Mathewson sniffed the ground. He lifted his head and proceeded forwards, silently stepping forwards. His usually timid nature was overpowered by his natural instinct. He saw the young intern just feet from where he was standing, and he lunged at her. He grabbed her by the ankle and pulled her to the floor. Alexandra kicked and thrashed around trying to release her foot from the lion's grip, but the 500-pound, 230-kilogram lion pulled her into his outer enclosure. Animal trainer Ashley Watts, who was working with Alexandra at the time, jumped into action. She desperately tried to separate the lion from the young intern, trying to distract him and lure him away, but Mathewson was fixated on Alexandra. He then leapt on top of Alexandra and instinctively went for her neck. He closed his crushing jaws around her windpipe and dragged her around his enclosure, scraping her over the concrete. Alexandra was still alive at this point. Her colleagues screamed and shouted at the lion and immediately called for backup. Ashley Watts ran for a hose pipe, and powered it at the lion, but to no avail. Mathewson was not budging. Soaking his face, aiming at his eyes and his snout, he didn't flinch. By now, Alexandra was bleeding profusely from the neck. The lion's 3-inch, 7-centimeter canines had cut deeply into her flesh, severing her arteries and fracturing her spinal cord. But Alexandra had fought back. Despite the incredible power of the 14-year-old lion's bite and being dragged around the enclosure by her neck, the young intern put up an impressive fight. She had punched and pulled, scrabbled and hit the lion with her arms as she began to lose consciousness. The autopsy report shows remarkable defensive wounds on Alexandra's arms from fighting back. She fought until the end. Mathewson readjusted his grip, puncturing Alexandra's skull, and his claws dug into her shoulder, chest, and back. The young woman, who had dreamed of working with these animals for so long, now lay limp in the captive lion's enclosure. Through no fault of her own, she had lost her life that day. There was nothing anybody could do to try and get to Alexandra before it was too late. The attack had been rapid, it had been brutal, and the severe injuries Alexandra had sustained were inflicted in a matter of seconds. The Caswell County Sheriff's Office responded to the distress call. Its deputies arrived just before midday. Upon arrival, they noticed a lion running around inside an enclosure with several people running around the outside of it. One of the police officers grabbed his 12-gauge shotgun from the trunk of his patrol car and ran over to the commotion. The center was ill-prepared for an eventuality like this. There were no tranquilizers near the lion's enclosure, and the staff were desperately trying to usher the lion back into his indoor pen, but it wasn't working. To the officers that arrived on scene, it looked like chaos. The lion was not listening to his handlers, and he continued to pace around his enclosure, preventing anyone from getting close to Alexandra. Even when the tranquilizer darts finally arrived on the scene, one gun jammed and they had to run about, trying to find another. They lured the lion closer to the fence with raw meat, and then the center's CEO Doug Evans fired the tranquilizer darts into the lion. The lion flinched, but the medicine didn't take effect. Staff tried again, firing a second dart into the lion's muscle. Again, he didn't respond to the anesthetic. They tried once more. When 3 tranquilizers didn't bring the lion down, the sheriff's department gave the order to shoot and kill the lion. They needed to get to Alexandra. They needed to try and rescue her. Maybe there was still a chance they could resuscitate her. After 7 shots from the shotgun, the lion fell to the ground, but an 8th was shot into the animal's heart to make sure he was dead. Mathewson finally succumbed, breathing his last breath. It is hard to imagine that captive animals can deliver such devastating damage, having never set foot in the wild. But the fact of the matter is that these animals are still technically wild. They still have thousands of years of natural instinct within their DNA. That hunting instinct is still strong. Even those born and bred in captivity can turn on their keepers without warning, having spent years within a familiar environment. The Conservators Center in Burlington had been inspected just months before Alexandra's fatal attack. In April 2018, the U.S. Department of Agriculture found nothing of concern or out of compliance. There had been no workplace safety complaints made by employees at the center. An earlier inspection in 2017 also found the facility to comply with all safety regulations and procedures. It seems that this was an accident, a tragic and freak accident with no one to blame. Known by her friends as Alex, following her death it was obvious how much of an impact she had on people's lives. Her passion for animals and conservation were clear through her work, and her colleagues were always impressed by Alex's hardworking ethos. She had an unrivaled enthusiasm for the job and a permanent smile across her face that lit up any room she walked into. The death of anyone so young is tragic, but losing a passionate conservationist like Alex was a loss for the entire zoological and conservation community. The amazing person that she was will always shine brighter than the terrifying lion attack that led to her final affliction.